In my last video, I took cheap brisket steaks and tried to make them as tender as prime rib. I tested sous vide and different enzymes, but some of you said the steaks looked too tough, and you called me a clickbaiter, a sensationalist, and a fraud. So I went back to the lab. I jacquarded, I doubled the sous vide time, I injected the enzymes, I used a meat slicer to cut them thin and glue them back together with meat glue, then sous vided them for 48 hours. I tested everything you guys suggested, and I found a method that makes these cheap brisket steaks even more tender than my last video. Like, is this really brisket tender? All while maintaining a perfect medium rare texture. This is gonna change the way you guys cook steak for cheap, so let's get smoking. I'm starting with a 12-pound brisket and separating the point from the flat, then removing all the fat and cutting it into 1.5-inch steaks, a little bit thinner than my last video where I did 2-inch steaks. Some people commented in my last video that brisket is not cheap. Now, I love you guys, but I need to mansplain a little bit here. Brisket is one of the cheapest cuts of beef per pound. Yes, brisket may cost over $100 if you buy a whole brisket, and that may seem expensive, but when you compare the cost per pound to ribeye or other steak cuts at your grocery store, you will immediately realize that brisket is cheap as dirt. This is as true in Texas, where many of my viewers live, as it is in Calgary, Canada, where I live. Cutting a brisket up into steaks is cheap, and it will save you a ton of money. Now, after cutting all of the brisket into 1.5-inch steaks, this is how many steaks I got from one brisket. Pretty good. Next, seeing as we're sous viding for 48 hours in this experiment, I'm disinfecting the surface of the steaks by dunking them in boiling water for just a few seconds. This is a sous viding trick that helps prevent thermophilic bacteria growth while sous viding over 24 hours at 130 degrees. 130 is going to kill the pathogens that can hurt us, but some harmless thermophilic spoilage bacteria can still grow past 130 and kind of stink up the meat. So this kills off most of them at the outset to help prevent that. Now I'm pulling out this little guy. This is a jacquard. It has a bunch of little spring-loaded serrated blades that mechanically tenderize meat. I'm doing a couple passes on both sides of each of the steaks. Then I'm seasoning the steaks with Smoke Trails BBQ brisket rub, great brisket rub that I developed myself, available on my website, smoketrailsbbq.com, and also Amazon. This stuff is great on briskets, obviously, but it's really good on steaks, surprisingly, and I've gotten great feedback from people using it on their steaks. Now, all the jacquarded steaks are going in the sous vide at 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Next up are the sliced and meat glued steaks. Someone commented on my last video that the only way to make brisket steaks tender is to slice them with a meat slicer and glue them together with meat glue. So I was like, that sounds like fun, let's do it. So I'm slicing up a few steaks on my meat slicer into thin slices, and once I have little strips of meat, I'm using some moo glue to glue them back together. Meat glue, or transglutaminase, is an enzyme that bonds proteins back together. Enzymes are super cool. They're not living like our cells. They're more like biological robots made of protein. Our cells produce them to perform specific functions. Now, they respond to specific stimuli like increase in temperature, decrease in temperature, or a specific molecule might bind to a specific enzyme and then trigger it to do something. In the case of transglutaminase, the enzyme is triggered in the presence of protein to stitch those proteins back together. So very helpful in the case of something like blood clotting in our bodies. If we get a cut, it stops us from bleeding forever. So scientists looked at this, they isolated the enzyme, and they were like, hey, let's try to make chicken nuggets with this. So you could theoretically throw a bunch of meat scraps together and use meat glue to glue them back together. And the theory here and the mechanism for tenderizing them would be that you are slicing the individual muscle fibers, so cutting the tough collagen and connective tissue, and then you're gluing back just the soft, tender protein and not the tough collagen, so you get a more tender result. Will it work though? I have no idea, but we're gonna find out. Okay, now all these meat glued steaks are going into bags. I'll let them sit out for 30 minutes, then I'll put them into the sous vide with the other steaks. You'll notice I'm not sucking the air out of the bag with my mouth here like I did with the other steaks. That's because there's a myth that transglutaminase powder can potentially glue your lungs together if you inhale it. Now, from what I've read, that is a total myth. You need specific circumstances for the transglutaminase to activate. It's not gonna glue your lungs together if you inhale it, but I'd rather not test it on myself. Now, 24 hours later, I'm doing my first test, pulling out the 24-hour jacquarded and sous vided steak. I'm using a digital force gauge to objectively test tenderness. It gives me the maximum amount of force in newtons that I had to apply in order to pierce the steak all the way through. Now, technically, I should be using a Warner Bratzler shear test machine to do this, but that's like a $30,000 piece of equipment, and this cost me, I think, $60. Now, eventually, I'm going to improve on these tests by attaching the force gauge to this leather press so that I can pull it down with with a constant force, and then I'll have to figure out something like a screw drive or maybe a pulley system so that I'm getting constant tension and speed. That's the biggest problem, because with these force gauges, what's happening is I'm pushing down, but the amount of force I'm applying and the speed at which I'm going actually affects the result as well. But just using the digital force gauge by hand is the best option I have right now. After doing my tests, it was very tender, but just like in my last video, the texture wasn't quite medium rare like a traditional steak. It was rosy pink, but it had kind of a drier, more deli meat type texture. Next up is the meat glued and 24-hour sous vide steak. The meat glue held the strips of steak together slightly, but it was still more tough than the 24-hour jacquarded and sous vide steak. And the texture, to be honest, just felt like a bunch of steak strips glued together, which is what you might expect because that's exactly what we did. The next day, so around 40 hours into the test, I mixed up some powdered bromelain enzyme. This is a proteolytic enzyme from pineapples that breaks down muscle tissues, and it's one of the most popular meat tenderizing enzymes in the world. I blended it up, injected it into a steak, and then left it at room temperature for 2 hours to tenderize. Last video, I only did 30 minutes and it didn't really tenderize the steak enough, so this time I'm doing 2 hours, and I'm also injecting it. Next, I went straight to the source of bromelain and blended up a pineapple and injected the puree into another steak and gave it the same treatment. This is easy to do at home. You just get a pineapple. Most of the bromelain is in the core of the pineapple and the stem, which is usually gone by the time you get a pineapple. So what you can do is you can just take all the flesh out of the pineapple and eat it, and then take the core and the peel and even the leaves and just blend it up in a Vitamix, and that's your tenderizing liquid. And that also goes into a bag for 2 hours at room temperature. Finally, I blended up some collagenase powder and injected it into another steak. Collagenase is an enzyme produced by a bacteria called Clostridium histolyticum. Unlike other proteolytic enzymes like bromelain, collagenase specifically targets and breaks down collagen. So my hope is that it can specifically target the tough connective tissues in steak and break them down while leaving the muscle tissue intact and not turning it to mush. You can't buy collagenase commercially. It's something that's only available for laboratory use, and I'm just experimenting with it because I think that the concept of specifically targeting collagen is super interesting in the context of tenderizing meat. Now, after 2 hours, I removed all the tenderizing steaks. I rinsed them and jacquarded them to tenderize them even more. Technically, it might be more effective to jacquard them first and then tenderize them, because then you have more pathways for the enzymes to enter the meat, but this is the way that I did it. Then I seasoned them and I sous vided them for 2 hours at 130 degrees just to bring them up to medium rare temperature. Lastly, I prepared the control steak. One control will be jacquarded and sous vided at 130 for 2 hours. So again, just enough to take it to medium rare. And the other steak, I won't do anything to it. It's just a pure control. All I'm doing is I'm bringing it up to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So medium rare texture in the sous vide. Now, just to be clear, 2 hours at 130 isn't enough time to really tenderize the steak or do anything. You have to leave it in for 24 hours to really tenderize it. This is purely just a method to bring it up to the right medium rare texture. All right, guys, it's time for the final taste test. So let's start out with the control. This is actually feeling pretty nice, probably because it was only heated up to 130 over the course of, I think, 2 hours. So let's give this a test here. Ooh, I can't even get through it with this thing. Going up to like 93 newtons, 100 newtons. So this thing is tough, and I'm not even gonna bother doing 2 more holes in it because look at this, 104 newtons. That is a lot tougher than the other samples that we have previously tested. So I'm just gonna call it quits right there. Let's find out if these slices are any more tender. I highly doubt it. This just feels like a brisket steak that you cooked up to 130, 135 and didn't do anything else to it. And understandably, feels quite tough. Like I'm having to saw into it a little bit. So it's got some nice rosy color. Nothing wrong with that. Let's try to pull it apart. Yeah, hard to pull apart. Let's check what force is needed to get through it. About 22, 19, and 23. So 22, 19, 23. Very tough. Still edible, it's not terrible. But you gotta have some good teeth for that steak. Grandma and Grandpa aren't gonna be able to chew through that. Okay, moving on to the jacquarded brisket steak. So this was jacquarded and then just cooked at 130 for 2 hours. So it just came up to 130. Zero this, give this a couple pokes. Ooh, that went right through. 17, 18, 7. 17, 18, 7. So a lot more tender than the control, and well, that makes sense because it's a lot thinner if you look at it. Once I jacquarded everything, it kind of turned into a flat pancake of a steak. So let's slice into this. And it's got some rosiness. It's looks like it's like crumbling, almost falling apart. It pulls apart effortlessly. Tastes absolutely delicious, and it's super tender. Let's see if this can give us some more information. 6, 11, 3, 6, 11, 3. Very tender, a lot more tender than the control steak. Oh, yeah, I could eat that all day. That's really good. Actually, I'm gonna save this for comparison because this is actually probably the best sample that I've tasted in this experiment so far. So let's put that aside and we'll move on to the pineapple tenderized brisket steak. Whew. This thing feels mushy. Look at this. It's like a sloppy, oh my God, it's like dissolving. Like I didn't cut these off. These just fell right off. And it's coated in like a mushy gravy. Oh, that does not look appetizing at all. Look at this. It's like the alien just spit its acid spit onto it and it's just melting. That was still pretty tough. 18.4. This is gross to even handle. 23. Ugh, I don't even want to touch it. 18, 23, and 8. So this was the pineapple steak that was injected and left to kind of brine for 2 hours, which was probably too long. Let's cut this thing. Like it's just melting. It's kind of like pulled beef at this point. I'll pull it apart. I don't think I can even do any more tests here with the smaller slices. 10, 7, this is so gross. 10, 7, 4, so very tender. So gross, I gotta wipe my hands off. I'm just gonna change my gloves entirely. Okay, let's give it a taste. I can't even tell if it's medium rare because it's covered in this gross gravy-like stuff. Not good at all. It tastes like almost powdery, sandy, grainy, like a pineapple gravy. Oh, it's getting worse. How can it be getting worse? Ugh. Oh man, that is not good, guys. I'm gonna throw this out. Yeah, do not do that. You know, it's so funny how just pureed pineapple can just melt a steak. Just melt it. And you know what? It didn't even dissolve the tough connective tissues. Like it was still kind of tugging in certain areas. It's almost like it dissolved all the muscle fibers and left all of the collagen connective tissue, which is like the opposite of what you want to happen. Okay, I've got most of the pineapple gravy off my cutting board now. Now this is the pure bromelain injection. So similar to the pineapple, it is kind of mushy. Oh, oh, oh. That is disgusting. That smells so freaking bad. Here it is, guys. That is the bromelain injected for 2 hours. Do I even want to test it? I can pull it right apart. It's still pretty rosy in the middle. 11, 7, 4. Let's slice into it. Oh God, this is so unappetizing. It is rosier and pinker than the other one, maybe because it's thicker. It held up a little bit better. Oh, it smells so bad. Something about that concentrated bromelain. The pineapple definitely didn't smell this bad. Oops, so that's 5.8. Well, that's a bit tougher. Let's throw that measurement out. It's kind of just pushing it through the hole. 3, so 7, 3. 7, 3, and 9. And I guess I have to taste this. It looks pretty good, actually. Like, it looks medium rare. No, I had to spit it out. That is frickin' disgusting. Gross. Like the last one, it's like, oh, it just keeps on getting worse. It just keeps on getting worse. It's kind of sandy, grainy. It's like a pineapple-y gravy. It doesn't even taste like pineapple though with that bromelain extract. It has a bad taste to it. And I can't really describe what that taste is. It's chemicals, chemical taste. It's just stinky. It reminds me of like the smell of a retirement home. Whatever cleaner they use in there, it just has that weird old person retirement home vibe. Ugh. Okay, the collagenase. Oh my Lord. Has this just completely dissolved into goo? Oh my God, guys. This is getting ridiculous. Oh, that smells awful. It just has this stanky, musty smell. And this is, oh God. Oh God. That's so gross. Look at this. It's just like completely dissolved, totally gross, meat mush. Yeah, I'm just gonna throw that right out. Collagenase, I think I need to do some more research on it. It did look like the muscle fibers were still semi-intact. They were still red, and you could tell that all of the interconnective tissue was just gone. It just dissolved it, which is really interesting. But I think it needed a little bit less time for all of those samples. 2 hours was way too long. Okay, now finally we have the 48-hour samples. This is the 48-hour jacquarded brisket. So let's give this a test. Get the pineapple gravy off there. Oh my God. This is one of those gross experiments, guys. What'd I do for the sake of science? 25, 29 to get through a really thick piece of steak. 29, 25, and 25. 29, 25, 25. Let's get some slices out of this guy. And I'm not gonna taste it because I don't really feel comfortable from a food safety standpoint. 48 hours is a little bit too much for me. Actually, just looking at this, I'd probably eat this one. I'm probably gonna pass on the meat glue one, just like the last one. It's looking nice and rosy. Pulls apart just effortlessly. 6, 5, and 7. It is starting to get a little stinky, not that bad, but again, this just looks like roast beef deli meat that you'd buy in the store, almost like pastrami. So this is not medium rare steak in my opinion, even though it technically never got above 130 degrees, it's overcooked. Okay, now for the 48-hour meat glued brisket steak. I am afraid to see what this Frankensteak looks like. Okay, there we go. Similar to the other meat glued steaks, looks weird. I can almost pull this thing apart. It's very thick, so this is gonna be a little bit skewed, but it's 19, and this thing is just going right through it like butter. 20, 30. And we'll slice this guy into 1/4-inch slices. Similar to the other meat glue steak, it's kind of reddish on the interior still. It pulls apart effortlessly. It's not as stinky as the other one, but it still has a little bit of stank to it, a little bit of mushroominess. Like this is clearly a couple pieces of steak glued together and it's held together pretty well. It pulls apart easily, but I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze here, guys. Save your money, don't buy meat glue for this. I should, for the sake of completeness, just get a couple data points here. So 17, 7, 13. Okay, now let's go back to the just jacquarded brisket steak. Look at that, it's nice and pink, it's medium rare. I only cooked it for an hour and a half, 2 hours at 130, and it's delicious. It also pulls apart easily. Look at this. This is a brisket steak that has been cooked for 2 hours, and it pulls apart pretty easily. Is this as tender as prime rib? Yes, it is. It's probably more tender than prime rib, actually. If you slice it thin enough and you jacquard it, that's all you really need to do. So conclusions for this video, which methods worked the best? Well, let's take a look at the objective data for the force needed to penetrate each 1/4-inch slice of steak. The sliced meat glued and sous vide steaks were the most tender, but they had a weird texture. I wouldn't do that again. All the enzymatically tenderized steaks were at least twice as tender as the control, but again, weird texture. I'm really not liking tenderizing enzymes right now, and I probably wouldn't do that if I'm cooking a steak for myself. The 24-hour jacquarded then sous vide steak was twice as tender as the control and still had decent medium rare texture, but not that great. And finally, the Jacquard only steak was the third most tender and had perfect medium rare texture, so it was the objective winner of this experiment and the subjective winner as well, because I felt like it still had that traditional medium rare texture while still being super tender, as tender if not even more tender than prime rib or ribeye. So the takeaway from this video is get yourself a Jacquard. I'll put a link to one in the description section below. After you get a Jacquard, slice your steaks to around 1.5 inches thick, Jacquard it all over, season it, then bring it slowly up to 130 degrees in your sous vide or your oven, doesn't really matter, then rest it down to around 120 degrees internal, maybe 15 minutes, and finally give it a quick hot sear. That'll give you medium rare steak as tender, if not more tender than prime rib or a ribeye, and for a fraction of the cost. And if you don't want to get a Jacquard, then my second best recommendation would be the 24-hour sous vide brisket steaks. If you have any other ideas for experiments you want to see on the channel, let me know in the comments section below, and until next time, happy smoking.